Annyeonghaseyo, ninth graders. Welcome to Coronavirus Part 4. I talked to some of you throughout the week, and some of you mentioned that there was still a lot of notes to take and that you're still spending a lot of time working on your science class assignments. So I want to try and streamline our science assignments as much as possible. Today, hopefully, will be a shorter lesson for you. So our objectives today. First, our content objective is applying our knowledge of the coronavirus to imagine how it's going to affect refugees. And our language objective will be to write about how the coronavirus will affect refugees. Keywords are capacity. Capacity is your ability to do something. So some of you were telling me that you didn't have the capacity to do all of your work for distance learning because you were super busy or the classes were too long, or you had other things to do at home that reduces your capacity to do something. In this case, when we talk about capacity, we're talking about your ability to do something. Next is the word vulnerable. Vulnerable should be a word that all of you know. It's kind of a combination of this idea of being weak and then also being exposed. So when you're both weak and exposed, you are vulnerable. So we mentioned that people who have lung disease or lung problems, they're vulnerable to the coronavirus. Our next two words are actually math words, just area and ratio. You should know what an area is. It's the measure of space inside of an object. And ratio. Ratio is a kind of a comparison between two numbers. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our homework. I was very surprised to see that out of the two sets of homework assignments I gave, there was only one correct answer for one of them. So let's talk about flatten the curve. So flatten the curve is something that you have undoubtedly seen if you've read any news about the coronavirus. And not only did we do this for our entrance task, but I also explained it in another slide to all of you. But apparently I didn't do a good job because lots of you struggled to explain it to me for homework. I think the biggest thing that people got tripped up on was this concept here, protective measures. So protective measures is not talking about masks, it's not talking about medicine or hospitals. Protective measures is simply talking about social distancing. So if we practice social distancing, then people will get sick much more slowly. Another thing that people did not understand was that this red sort of parabola and this blue parabola represent the same amount of people who are sick. If we actually measured the area of these two parabolas, they would be the same. Just for the sake of, I don't know, this exercise, let's imagine that this parabola equals 100 million people. So if 100 million people get sick with the coronavirus all at the same time, it's going to be a problem because of our healthcare system capacity. So what this means is that there are a limited number of hospitals, limited number of rooms, limited number of doctors, nurses, ventilators, medicine. And because that's limited, if everyone gets sick all at the same time, they're not going to be able to help everyone. Lots of people are going to die. However, if we spread out that sickness over a longer period of time, the same number of people can still get sick, but because it's spread out over a longer period of time, more people can get help. Okay, and so what this means is that someone gets sick, they go to the hospital, and they get better, they leave the hospital, that room opens up for someone else, and then someone else who gets sick can go in. If illness is spread over a longer amount of time, then that can happen. If it all happens at the same time, that's impossible. So we can think about this by using an analogy to Sejong Academy. Sejong Academy has grades 1 through 9. It also has kindergarten and pre-K, so it has a total of 12 or 11 different classes. And so imagine if we all went to lunch at the same time at 12 noon. If 11 different grades went to lunch at noon, the cafeteria would be overwhelmed, right? You'd probably have to wait hours to get any food. There's only 2 cafeteria workers, so it would just take a really long time. And if we imagine that if you don't get your food in 20 minutes, you would die, then it would be horrific. It'd be a massacre, right? Um, and so we can think of this as an analogy for um, our graph without protective measures and with protective measures. So if everyone goes to the cafeteria at the same time, no one gets to eat. However, if we spread out the number of classes going to the cafeteria, like one class every 20 minutes over the course of 2 hours, then everyone can eat and it's not too much of a problem. So that's what this graph is showing when we talk about flattening the curve. It's showing the importance of social distancing. Next, I want to talk about our critical thinking exercise. We were talking about the number of coronavirus deaths in Seattle and the sort of scary and alarming percentage of people that were dying of the coronavirus in Seattle. At one point in time, they said as many as 30% of people were dying of the coronavirus in Seattle. However, we also said that number wasn't reliable because of the amount of testing that was done. And I asked all of you to explain why. And most of you focused on the fact that if there's less testing, it spreads more quickly, more people get sick, more people die. Most of you didn't understand that that fatality rate, that mortality rate in Seattle actually probably never was 30%. Even if lots more people are getting it and lots more people are dying, that doesn't mean the mortality rate is increased. The mortality rate is always going to be 1 or 2%, right? So if more people are dying, that means more people are getting it, right? So if it's 1 to 3% and 30 people die, then that means 100 people got it. If 300 people die, that means 1,000 people got it. If 3,000 people die, that means 10,000 people got it, so on and so forth. So the relationship between the number of people who are tested and the number of people who are dying and the reliability of those numbers, that's just a pure math issue. So really it comes down to this idea of ratios. A ratio is just when you're comparing two numbers. It's the number of things that you're counting compared to the total number, in this case, total number. So for example, if we're talking about pieces of fruit in the bowl, there are 9 pieces of fruit in a bowl. And if we talk about oranges, there are 5 oranges. So 5 out of 9 pieces of fruit are oranges. Okay, that's a simple ratio. Another way we talk about ratios is percentages. So if we look at Seattle and imagine that they had 30 deaths and they had 100 positive tests of the coronavirus in Seattle, they might say, oh my goodness, if you get the coronavirus, there's a 30% chance that you're going to die. However, this number was not reliable at all. Why? Because there were probably a lot more people in Seattle that had the coronavirus that just never got tested. If you remember, I was telling you earlier in the week about the woman across the street from me. She got the coronavirus. She got it. She went for a test and they said, we're not going to give you the test because we don't have enough tests. We are only going to give out the test if you need to be hospitalized. And so that's one out of, I'm sure, very many people who had the coronavirus who never got tested, and so their numbers don't go into the system. Does that make sense? So if there were 30 deaths from the coronavirus, okay, out of 100 positive tests, that's like 30% of people are going to die of the coronavirus, but that's just not a reliable number. If we look at all different places around the world, China, South Korea, Italy, Spain, people are coming up with this number again and again, 1 to 3%. And so in order to figure out how many people actually probably did have the coronavirus, we just need to do a little bit of math. Okay, so I don't know, my picture is covering up the math here, but basically, let me readjust. Basically, 30 equals 3 over 100, which is 3%, times x. So how do we find that? We multiply 30 times 100 divided by 3. and that gives us 1,000. So probably there were 1,000 people in Seattle that were positive for coronavirus, but they only got 100 positive test results back. That just means they're just not testing enough people, so those numbers were not reliable. So this weekend I was listening to public radio, and they were talking about the Navajo people and how the coronavirus is affecting them. The Navajo people are Native American people. They live in the United States, but they live under conditions of extreme poverty. Many of them don't have running water. Many of them don't have electricity. Many of them don't have refrigerators. Lots of them have health issues. And so as I was listening to the story, it made me really think about the students in our class who have very strong connections to refugee camps in other parts of the world. And, I just want to acknowledge that all of the students in our class are refugees, and coronavirus is going to affect these populations, these vulnerable populations, much differently than it is, for example, someone who's living in a big city like Minneapolis or St. Paul. So for our assignment today, I want us to think about how coronavirus is going to affect refugees. Specifically, you can write about either one, how it's going to affect refugee camps, or two, how it's going to affect refugees in the United States. You could probably write a doctoral thesis on this, or you could write a master's doctoral dissertation or a master's thesis on this topic. So I don't want you to do a ton of research, but what I want you to do is I want you to think about what we've learned about the coronavirus, what we know about the coronavirus, and how people that are poor can be vulnerable to the coronavirus. So think about how those factors play a role in how coronavirus affects those people, and then write about 5 to 8 sentences about how people in either refugee camps or refugees in the United States might be vulnerable to the coronavirus. I would like you to give maybe 3 different examples of how the coronavirus will affect these communities, or how these communities are more vulnerable to the coronavirus. So if you have any questions, please contact me at sjkwok@sageyoungacademy.org. You can also contact me during office hours. That's every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. I'll put a link in the description. And then finally, I also wanted to mention that on Thursday, we will have a live lecture. And so from 1:45 p.m. until 2:35 p.m., our regular class time, I will be meeting all of you via Google Meet. This will be a mandatory class, so please make sure you're there. If you can't come, please notify me in advance. At that time, I'll give you a short lecture, and then you can feel free to ask me any questions you might have on the topic of the coronavirus. This is something that I would like to do once a week. Probably not on Thursdays. Probably we'll shift to Mondays. Every Monday we'll have a live lecture, and then I can take questions, and we can, get set for the rest of the week from there. If you're interested in that NPR article that I mentioned to you, you can check out the link at the bottom. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Peace.